Misfortune.gb. Misfortune is an obscure game for the Game Boy. Since no known hard copies or ROMs exist, all information about the game is derived from personal accounts and a scant assemblage of screenshots. The game does not contain any credits, and whoever created it is still unknown to this day. The few people who have experienced it consider it to be one of the scariest video games ever made. Given its age and cult following amongst horror game enthusiasts, it's entirely possible that authors of widely known creepypastas, such as Sonic.exe and Lavender Town Syndrome, drew inspiration from Misfortune. The player controls what appears to be a young boy in a strange gothic town. After brief exploring, the player is confronted by a malevolent being. Despite the character never identifying itself, some people, citing notable similarities, claim that it may be a representation of Baphomet, Beelzebub, or even the devil. Upon meeting the mysterious creature, a dialogue box will appear with the text, "I exist within the very fabric of reality. Do you want to challenge me?" This is followed by a yes or no choice. Should the player choose yes, the being replies, "Then let's begin." The player is transported into a series of maze-like rooms, each filled with pit drops, locked doors, keys, and traps. The objective for each player is to progress through each room by either reaching the stairs to the next level or solving another kind of puzzle. This can include answering riddles or choosing correct doors or pathways. The most well-known example is in a level where 4 small cabins are shown on screen. A dialogue box will appear that reads, "Choose wrong and misfortune will befall your loved ones. Are you ready to play?" Should the player ever make a mistake throughout the game, the screen will cut to black, before showing a more detailed image of a demon alongside a dialogue box reading, "I am God here," in what appears to be blood-styled writing. Rumors pertaining to the game allege harmful effects begin to surface on the internet around the late 1990s. Players claim to have begun experiencing ongoing depression and dread shortly after losing and seeing the game over screen. Once prominent members of online forums who told such claims are thought to have died or disappeared when they suddenly became inactive without warning. Heated discussions soon dominated these forums for some time, but the mystery never seemed to be getting any closer to being solved. Some wrote the whole thing off as a tasteless practical joke. Others believe that viewing the image of the devil character after losing the game can really cause the player to experience misfortune, as the game's antagonist promised. Soon people began to speculate that the eerie soundtrack of the game was the cause. The music in the game consisted of deep, buzzy tones, off-key melodies. The game had a remarkably unsettling soundtrack despite composition being limited to 8-bit Game Boy sound bank. The game over screen had especially erratic, almost nauseating music, with a very high frequency that accompanied it. Rumor has it that this very track could somehow influence moods and thought patterns. Of all the tracks in the game, only the theme that plays when first meeting the demonic entity can be found on the internet today. Searching for playable ROMs or cartridges online is futile because none exist. In fact, most of those who have played it directly haven't sought out looking for it, but rather stumbled upon it by accident. According to first-hand accounts, certain copies of various Game Boy titles contain Misfortune in its entirety. This means for accessing it through these games vary, but typically involves exploiting glitches or using cheating devices. Although some have detailed what they had done to trigger Misfortune to start, attempts by others of using the same method had always failed. Another common observation was that many of the sprites in Misfortune had been copied from its host games. Misfortune is known to be integrated in the following: Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, Pokemon Red, Spud's Adventure, Poochie Carrot, A Taylor Marie, Japan. For this section, I'm going to be speaking to you a lot less impartially and a lot more personally. It's important you read this part. Now, is the game really cursed? Does a specter really bide within and snare the innocent in its deadly game? Who knows? What I do know is that the game definitely exists. I also know what it can do. I've never played it myself, you see, but I know someone who did. A good friend of mine, actually. We were closer than brothers, and we told each other everything. He was the most enthusiastic, outgoing guy I'd ever met, and like me, he was really into video games. Sure enough, one day he told me that he found a spooky new side game hidden in Pokemon. He showed it to me, and even back then, it gave me an odd feeling. Though to be fair, I was always easily scared. Soon after, he started talking less and less. Later, he'd either ignore my calls or tell me that he was sick or busy when I invited him out. He became something of a recluse. I did still sometimes get to see him at high school, but he rarely spoke and snapped at me when I tried to pry too much over why he was acting that way. About a month later, before he got off the train after school, he said goodbye for the first time in weeks. I'll never forget the look he gave me that day. He was the macho, nothing gets to me type of guy, and he always masked his emotions really well. But now he had a face filled with grief, like he was about to cry. He made me promise him one thing before he left, that I'll never play that game. That was the last time we spoke. The next morning, they found his scratched and bloodied corpse hanging from his disassembled weight machine. The police concluded that he managed to lift 220 pounds of weights over his head, with the cord still attached, looped around his neck, and released it over the other side of the machine, causing a strangulation as the weight of the other side yanked him upwards. The most horrible detail was that he was found with his hands clutching the inside of the makeshift noose, as if he were trying to tug it loose. That was it. The case was closed. Personally, I don't believe that's what happened. If you are a collector, or perhaps just have heard the legend and want to experience the game for yourself, you should reconsider. Even if you deny the existence of demons and curses, the misfortune that will befall you is very real. You have been warned. That was Misfortune.gb. Final thoughts? A hard one to judge. One thing that I'd like to point out before we get started is that although the story claims that Misfortune.gb is much older than Sonic.exe and Lavender Town Syndrome, after some research I found that although you can download a ROM and play the game the story is based on, the game was actually made in 2013 and just uploaded on multiple accounts in 2013, with some trying to claim that it was from 2003, and others trying to claim late 90s without any real evidence for either. So the story claims to be the inspiration for multiple stories, despite how in reality it came out later and took things from those stories. Depending on how you look at this could either be a really clever idea, or really insulting to the people who made Sonic.exe and Lavender Town Syndrome. I just thought I'd bring it up because it's probably very good information to know before judging the story. This game seems to be heavily inspired by the old Berserk arcade cabinet and the urban legends around that game. If you don't know, there's an urban legend in that game that if you get a high enough score, you'll die. It started because a player of the game back in 1980 actually died of a heart attack coincidentally right after beating a high score on it. Some tellings of the whole urban legend say that you'll have a heart attack just if you break a certain score, whereas other ones like to say that you'll slowly go insane and kill yourself because of the enemy Evil Otto in the game. But either way, it's likely that this story rolled with some of those ideas, whether it's direct or down the grapevine. To be fair though, that whole going insane and dying over time thing was used pretty commonly in stories and is just thought to be derived from the Evil Otto thing in Berserk. All around, I feel like this is a pretty good story until the last bit where the author tries to make it more personal. I feel like that bit really didn't need to be there. If you're gonna make an informal retelling of a story like you would around a campfire, I think it breaks that friend of a friend kind of story when you suddenly make it about someone that you personally know and start talking about them. Other than that, I feel like this is a story that I want to like more than I actually do. I can't help but have a bad taste left in my mouth after it claimed to be the inspiration for stories, when in reality, those stories happened first. That's it for this creepypasta. Tune in again next week for another video game creepypasta. If you want to write your own story, help peer edit a story, or even just read the stories early, check out the description where you'll find a link to the creepypasta section of my forum. You'll also find a link to the playlist of every creepypasta reading I've done. If you're interested in keeping up with me on my blog posts, join the Facebook fan page linked below. And if you want to support me and what I do, check out my Patreon page in the description. Remember that if you want to have your story read on the show, you must stay active on your post on the forum, as well as read the forum rules. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, sweet dreams.